welcome to a Leadership Forum community event. I got to say, we're thrilled to be here, and it's been a 2-year hiatus since we've had a face-to-face convening, and you'll hear a little bit more of the story of the Leadership Forum. But first, since I'm really excited you're here and online, do turn to some other people in the room real quickly. Online, out there in chat, just say, I'm so glad you're here. Greet a few other people.
Good morning, Joel.
Good morning, Rich.
And out there online again, we're all glad you're here too. And just my name's Joel. You can see I'm on the screen there. I work for Block, what used to be known as Square. I also spent some time with the Center for Creative Leadership. My old boss is actually here, Lyndon. So it's great to have many connections here. And for those of you that I haven't met, I look forward to getting to know you all better too. If you click forward to the next slide there, Vanessa. And I just want to say before we get going, thank you all for, of course, joining today. But I also want to give a couple shout outs to people that have really been a part of planning this. So one, I want to thank, those organizations. So we've got Paul's Adirondack Creamery here. Paul, just raise your hand here. So we'll get some. Yeah. So Paul has sponsored the ice cream. It's also what his company makes. He's the CEO there. So thank you, Paul, for being here. And while there's no one here from St. Francis College too, I also want to acknowledge that St. Francis College has provided this place to us with connections from National Grid. National Grid helped make it happen. Come on in. And so, St. Francis College, I should say last week or 10 days ago, we heard that National Grid, didn't get their CO for a room that was a beautiful training facility. And so we were like, oh boy, what do we need to do? And so fortunately, we were able to find this space here. But it is our first convening in a few years. So we've got St. Francis College, National Grid. I'm trying to think of all of the other ones here. Those provocateurs that are here, who are going to serve on the panel. Their organizations also are supporting them for being here. So those are NYU and Stride. And Jonathan, what would be your organization?
Bitwise Industry.
Bitwise Industry.
We build tech economies in underestimated places, fueled with underestimated talent.
All right, we got that down. And he has a wonderful podcast. And just as he has expressed so poetically about some of his work, we also have some amazing provocateurs here we'll also share. And we like to think of all of us in this community as provocateurs. So we all come with a wealth of experience and knowledge internally within organizations, whether those are corporations or nonprofits. We want to have a really rich dialogue today. So my thank yous are not all inclusive here. I need to look down at some notes. So Renee, who will be joining us a little bit later from National Grid, she was instrumental in bringing this together. She serves on our Unlearning Racism team as a chair there as well. And so just many, many thank yous to everyone. And I need to also give a shout out to our officers. So Faith, everyone needs to give a huge round of applause to her. Of this event and has been working hard on it, and the magic that we're going to experience together wouldn't happen without her. And then as you saw Vanessa behind me on the screen from Indonesia, she's helping out to support, as well as Matthew Mullins, who's on mute out there, but he's one of our officers as well. So there's been many, many people, as is always the case of putting one of these on. Okay, so next slide, Vanessa. Okay. I want to slow down for a moment, and just some people are new to the Leadership Forum community, and I want to just share a little bit of the history that we have had. And so the YMCA, with a number of lay leaders, JP Morgan, Vanderbilt, Dodge, and Wanamaker, over 100 years ago, came together to really encourage the YMCA to be a catalyst for leadership challenges. What were the human issues of that time that brought people together? And over 100 years ago, it was about employees being replaced by machines and other challenges of current economic situation that were being advanced and challenging society because of the Industrial Revolution of that time. So for 102 years, we met at this beautiful YMCA in upstate New York. Peter's the CEO, so Peter can wave there. And I connected with the Leadership Forum years ago, and that's how I connected with Lyndon, and as in many cases with communities, networks kind of support careers and such like that. But 100 years ago, that was, what brought us together in this beautiful place. And it's a place of privilege that primarily brought together a lot of white people at that time, and in our history, white men too. And after 102 years, we knew that we needed to become a different organization and a different community. We became our own 501c3 after our first 100 years, and we are looking towards a second century of impact. We started creating incubation labs where we could, think about some leadership challenges. And one of those labs was unlearning racism. And so there's a number of us that are on the team. Eileen's a part of it. Renee, who will be joining later at National Grid. Charlie is on it out there. Matthew is on it as well. And we wanted to, as over the last 2 years, we wanted to study this. And actually, LaTanya, too, who's in the back, helped start that lab, too. And Rebecca, yes, thank you. And Ken, yes, I need to remember all of these things. So the lab, wanted to put together a convening, and Ken really was one that said, let's do something in New York City because many CEOs, many organizations are struggling with this. We also have some other labs. One that I'm also connected with is around how do we democratize leadership and education? Enabling all young people to learn and grow, because what we learned when we were at CCL was that leaders come through and they often say, I wish I got this when I was younger. And so if that's the case, how do we start developing leaders earlier in their life? So this is where we used to convene. And today we have the challenge of convening in a place that maybe for some of us doesn't help us relax and engage in a way that so naturally can take place in a beautiful outdoor setting. So our challenge will be, how do we engage here and with people that are online? Next slide. So just a little bit more about our history is these topics down at the bottom: class struggle, collective bargaining, guaranteed minimum wage, experimentation and profit sharing, equal pay for women, abolition of child labor, were all early topics through our history. I don't want to suggest that all of those are solved, because we know that in particular, if you're a female in the room, equal pay for women is still not true at all, and we're still working towards that. We as a broader society. So these were some of the earlier leadership challenges, but leadership challenges have always been what brought us together. And so today we are going to be focusing on empowering equitable and engaging work cultures. You can go to the next slide, Vanessa. And this is the Leadership Forum's purpose now. So over 100 years, we matured studying leadership challenges and thinking about how do we better understand these, how do these impact ourselves, so that we can show up in different places and be more intentional about our impact. So expand our understanding of ourselves and the topic to be more intentional about our impact. Next slide, Vanessa. And so this is an image that has resonated with us. So Todd Churches were in the room, and he'll be joining a little bit later. He's the author of a book, Visual Leadership. And he's been a part of our community for a long time. He would really appreciate images that can help us think about the impact that we want to have, because each of us is a drop in the broader society. Each of us makes choices every day about how we show up. And we want to get, below the surface, as LaTanya will share a little bit more around how we can lead a little bit more effectively. Next slide, Vanessa. So Renee will be joining us a little bit later. She was going to talk a little bit more about the purpose of the Unlearning Racism Lab. I've already shared a little bit about that. And so we're going to move in just a minute into the panel discussion and such. But one last quote for everyone. Just go back to that quote there. This was a quote by a longtime leader within the Leadership Forum. And he gave this to a colleague of Lyndon's and I a number of years ago. And I don't want us to put too much weight in good person. Let's think of everyone in the world as a good person. But let's think about the good person is one who has undergone a kind of death of self and who lives a life transformed by entering imaginatively into the lives of others, anticipating their needs and their interests. I want us to hold this quote true to us today. We have some brilliant people in this room across leader levels, provocateurs, participants, online. And what we've learned over the years is we often need to shed our ego to be able to engage fully in the topic to really help us all expand our own conscious leadership. So we all are incredibly bright, successful people at different journeys, different places. And how do we show up today in the container that we have here to really better understand the challenge that we're facing? So with that, Lyndon, want to invite you up here to transition us into the first part of the day.
Thank you, Joe. Good morning, everyone. I'm really excited to be with so many people that I've only met virtually in the same room, to have this wonderful setting here for our gathering. But we're going to be kicking off with a panel discussion that's really meant to spark our thinking about where things stand today. But hopefully from the perspective of the Leadership Forum, take a conscious leadership lens to that, which means we want to go deeper under the surface, like LaTanya's frame, but we also want to elevate our thinking so we have a broader perspective. And in order to get there, we'll have a panel discussion, which will be a little bit more of a fishbowl flavor in that we hope that'll be more dialogue, but it's also going to include everybody who's in attendance here. So we'll split our time between having our provocateurs share some of their perspectives, but then pivot to conversation with the people in the room and the people online, where you can also share your own thinking, your own perspectives. So that's the format that we'll be using. But I'd love to invite our provocateurs to join me down here. Take a seat. And as they're coming up, I'll just say that we've got a pretty diverse group of people who are joining us. We've got CEOs, we've got senior executives, we've got Anna Petlis, who is in academia, who essentially studies these issues and can bring a certain kind of perspective to us about what it looks like from a larger lens. So we've got people also from the nonprofit sector, from the startup economy, from large companies. And so we've got a number of perspectives from nonprofit sectors. So we've got a number of perspectives that we can bring to this issue. And with that, I'd like to invite maybe our panelists as they perhaps say who they are, perhaps to also add, what brought you here today? What made you choose to be a part of this conversation? Peter, maybe you can start.
I'm Peter Dolliver. I've already been outed as the CEO of Silver Bay. You're all welcome. Come visit. I'm here because Joel asked me. Perfectly blunt. Joel came and met with me about bringing the Leadership Forum back to Silver Bay. We had a great conversation, and he very graciously asked me to be a part of this. I had to do a lot of scrambling to learn more of what I said yes to. But I'm really honored and humbled to be a part of, especially with this panel. I plan to actually listen a lot more. I have a lot more to gain, so I'm very thankful to be here.
All right. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Martha Adeline, and then I'm basically a corporate banker. I work for Standard Chartered Bank. It's a UK headquartered bank, but its major footprints in Asia, Africa, and Middle East. I started my banking career back in 2008 in Indonesia, structured finance desk. So basically providing bespoke lending facility to corporate clients. In 2020, I was relocated to New York office. And then, yeah, I'm here now. Pretty much my role is managing an overall relationship of platinum financial institution clients. What I like about, I was educated in Indonesia and also in the UK, now living in New York. So I'm embracing, the true color of diversity and inclusion. And I'm a strong believer in the power of diversity and inclusion, wherever it is in the community, also in the workplace, everywhere. In my spare time, I'm also actively involved in Zan Innovation Center. It's a technology, it's a startup incubator program at the City of College, New York. Also, I organize like several financial literacy workshops for Zan, and also for LIDA. LIDA stands for Leadership Enterprise for a Diverse America. In Indonesia, also, I do the same kind of talks and workshops. So pretty much, I believe in, a better place, the world becoming a better place for everyone, but everyone feel like welcome and then accepted as who they are.
Good morning, Jonathan Hollifield. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Joel. I'm similar to you. I'm here because Joel invited me, but more refined. I am attracted to opportunities to learn and share. The pursuit of the more perfect is really appealing to me, and there are lots of perspectives, and I'm interested. I'm interested in contributing an experience and learning from multiple perspectives and experiences as well. And to keep it moving, I'll pass it.
Oh, that was very short. Yeah, I was actually invited by Phil Churches, I think, first, who is online and is going to be here later. Anna Tavis. I am the Department Chair for Human Capital Management Programs at NYU. And, I am a boomerang into academia. First, I started out as a tenured professor, but then I left academia because it felt too disconnected for me. And so I spent about 15 years in the business, including working in Europe for technology companies and on Wall Street here. And I think what bounced me back to academia was the financial crisis. I was the head of global talent for AIG at the time of the big blow up on Wall Street. And it was a very traumatic experience, as you can imagine, for the entire universe, and especially being in the eye of that hurricane here on Wall Street. But I think what really drives me today is the mission to connect all of the good things that we believe in and passionate about with actual skills. Because we need to put leaders out there who can do their jobs in the most, in the most masterful way, and at the same time lead businesses, lead organizations in the right direction. So I think that connection with leadership and specific skills, that because, as we all know, and Todd, who is our instructor as well, and we teach our students that leadership is not a separate discipline. You lead from where you are in every profession, every job, etc. So for us in academia, it definitely is about inspiring leaders and at the same time giving them the skills to make the difference in the world. And we want to make it as equitable as possible. And just one more thing, if you can allow me, I have my colleague here, Ali Margolis, who just joined us recently, that we are now looking at how to open up education and those wonderful educational opportunities in institutions like at NYU, which is in the top tier colleges in this country, to a much broader and much more diverse population of students, including New York City. So we have a lot, and I hope that I can speak to this later, but we have a lot of really interesting initiatives going on that specifically focus on the role of education.
To follow up. Okay, so I am Ken Judy. I'm CEO of a company called Stride Consulting. We're a strategic product design, development, and delivery shop. We build custom software basically for large companies. And I came to Stride and then stepped into the CEO role in collaborating with my founder in order to make what we do live up to the purpose that she started the company for, which is to, how we word it now is unlock human potential by engineering better systems. And what that means for us is our technical skills are always a means to an end, and that end is somehow impact. And so because of that focus on people and impact, my coworkers started to demand of me in our business things that I'd never expected to be accountable for. And so the leadership forum was a safe space for me to learn about anti-racism and to talk to people and make mistakes in a forum where you can't. In my role, mistakes are very, very bad ideas to do in front of people who really care about what you're saying. What I'm here for is I believe that I'm not the only person whose company is expecting more, whose employees, people, coworkers are expecting more of them than they've ever seen before. And we need to start acknowledging that and change the way we think about business, because do good and do well. It's like, think in larger timeframes, think of more stakeholders. Don't let yourself become transactional with the world in order to make money, but try to find a way to make enough money while doing something that ultimately has a positive impact in the world. So that's why I'm here.
We've got a terrific panel that can offer us a lot of insight about what's going on. And just to give you a sense of the flow for our conversation, we'd like to start out with kind of building a broader lens of awareness about what's going on in the workplace today. What are some of those issues and what's actually under the surface of those issues? We'd then like to pivot to the space of intention and say, well, what is it that we might want to see happen in terms of the workplace? Seeing ourselves as change agents who can kind of steer things in a certain direction. Where would we like to go? And then we'd like to get to being able to provide some level of inspiration. Where do we see bright spots? What are things that are happening that we can draw inspiration from? So again, drawing on the experience from there. And finally, to leave with a level of recommendation, if you will, takeaways of what we might actually do to create the shifts and to really think about the zone of action. And then as you kind of listen in, you'll have a chance to also share your own perspectives and your own insights. So we've got some index cards for you on the table, and we'll use those when we kind of come to the breakout conversations. But be sure to capture some insights along the way, because when we come to those conversations, this will be a jumping off point for your conversations. Right? So if I look at what's going on in the workplace right now, and Joel had on the screen that list of things historically that's been happening, there's just a lot going on today. We're coming off the COVID wave, not that we're done with it, but in terms of the rise of virtual work, perhaps a longer term trend that's been accelerated. We've got dynamics related to the great resignation, right quitting. We have some generational shifts with younger people coming into the workforce with perhaps a different set of expectations. We had a big push towards the EI issues, but also a push back against some of those issues in the workplace that's happening. We have a lot of women who are stepping out today, partly related to some of the dynamics that are happening. We've got technology and artificial intelligence that's changing the nature of work, sometimes for good, sometimes to exert greater control from organizations over employees. So just a lot of things that are actually underway. And rather than just recount what's going on, I'd love to turn to our panel and say, well, what's behind, what's under the surface of these issues? If you have to zoom out, if you will, and take a larger lens and say, well, what's really driving some of what's going on? And help us make sense of where we are at this time in the nature of work. And Anna, I'd like to come to you last, because I know you've written a book that's a lot about these issues. So you'll have a lot to offer. Maybe we'll start out with some of our panelists. Maybe how about you, Ken?
Oh, that's not intimidating at all. Love this. Well, there's a lot going on. I think that the excesses of prior decades and generational shifts means that we're on the edge of things either changing for the better or getting a lot worse. And I think people realize that. And so there's a rallying around, let's try to make it better instead of resign ourselves to it all falling apart. And that's around our impact on the planet. That's the potential decline of democracy itself as a power in the world. And I don't know, just the narrowness of that excuse that my responsibilities end at a certain boundary point, and I'm not accountable for what happens outside of that, which has been how business has operated. It's been how institutions have operated. It's how people kind of compartmentalize their lives. And I have a daughter who's 22. Everything that's happening right now is profoundly impacting her life. Right? She couldn't attend class for a whole year in person. She's had COVID twice. She is a technologist, she's an engineer, and she's going to graduate into a potentially huge recession. And she's really trying to figure out how to do work in engineering that doesn't contribute to the decline of the planet, harming people. And so I think that's kind of what's going on. And I feel like we're at this point where in that long arc towards justice, right? It's not just an arc, it's a set of advances and reversals. And we're at the point where the people who stand to lose from the change that needs to happen to make things better are going to do everything they can to prevent that change from happening. And we can either surrender to that or we can fight that.
Yeah, offer a perspective by way of analogy. In the last 60 or so years, schools have taken on a lot, and particularly K-12, a lot of things that they might not be best equipped to do. Similarly, seems that increasingly businesses are being asked to take on things that I'm not sure they're the best place to do it. This leads to an underlying challenge about us and the institutions that are chartered, anointed, expected to do this kind of human building. And where are they? I'm not sure businesses can carry the burden that they're increasingly being asked to carry. Just not sure that they can. Certainly. Conduct, behavior in the workplace, respect, all of the things that have risen to the top of our consideration. Absolutely. But how we think, why we think what we think, the values we have. I'm not sure I trust businesses to be responsible for inculcating values to me.
Thanks for putting that on the table, because we really would like to have a discussion, and that might be one of the things that would come down to.
All right. So I think, obviously there is a shift in the, generational shift, and then the world is just like getting crazy, as mentioned, like so many challenges that we are facing today. And then, and then the other thing also combined into that, the world is getting smaller, right? what happened in the other parts of the world, we know it right away, like just by Google or Yahoo it. And it's become smaller. The technology, the innovation also like was accelerated during COVID. So whatever happens, it's just like we are quickly aware of it. Now this leading to like a smaller world, and then we feel like, oh, I'm actually a citizen of the world. I'm not citizen of the United States alone or Indonesia alone. No, I'm actually citizen of the world. Now the question is, am I really accepted wherever I go in the world? Let's say if I move to this company, will I feel accepted or recognized by my colleagues, recognized by my boss, recognized by whoever? If I move to a different neighborhood, will I be accepted by different stakeholders in the community? So that's the question. It becomes a smaller world, but the question is, am I citizen of the world? Do I feel like accepted in the wherever places I go to? Now, diversity and inclusion are two interconnected words, but they are not similar, right? Diversity, we talk about a representation or a makeup of an entity of an organization. The other word, inclusion, is talking about how well the contribution or perspective of certain different groups are being valued or accepted, right? So they're interconnected but separate, right? So so this is something that we have to address. I mean, do you feel like the company you work for truly embrace the diversity and inclusion? Maybe I can ask every one of you, do you feel like, the community you live at, like, embrace the diversity and inclusion? The company you work for, like, they embrace the diversity and inclusion value. Is it because of the investor pressure or because of the peer pressure, or they are very genuine about it? If they are genuine, what are their action plans? Is it embedded in the culture of the company, etc.? So, we can talk hours about it, obviously, but I think that's what are the drivers, like, all the what happens in the world. And then, it's a changing world in the terms that, when I look back like 10 years ago, 12 years ago, when I started banking career, like, this is not something that was obvious. These days, I just did my research, like 71% of S&P 500 companies now, they have the chief diversity officer, right? So they make sure there is a consistent pipeline in the talent. There is a equitable workplace. That's their main job. Back in the days, 12 years ago, I remember when I moved here, I got a friend of mine, and then she was told by her boss that you are too old to manage this platinum clients. Like, wow, right? These days, you're going to be in HR room right away, right?
What I hear you putting on the table is employee expectations relative to
Correct.
what Jonathan put on the table is what should be the role of the company. Peter, what might you add?
I'm being last.
We got
Such great, I know, such incredible comments. A couple of things running through my mind. A comment that you made, Lyndon, regarding the pushback, and then Ken, what you mentioned with the arc of justice and the points, and so my mind is more like a pinball machine. So forgive me, it just kind of bounces off things. So I'll show you what's bouncing at the moment. One thing that came to mind for me when I was back in my theological studies, one of the principles I was taught was homeostasis, and that an organism will not tolerate moving out of its comfort zone. So your human body, if you get too hot, you sweat, you get too cold, you shiver, and that tolerance of degrees is really very, very small. Organisms work the same way. And when change is affected upon them, they react. And there is a contraction. The aspiration may be here, but the reality may be here. So part of it to me is what I think of as incremental radicalism. And that is, you work with a group, and I'm going to give you an example of a group working with currently. I have learned and actually been taught by a wonderful mentor of mine who was the mayor of Savannah, the second African-American mayor of Savannah. And he pulled me aside one day when I was working with an all-black Y, and he said, "Hey, you need to pull back. You can't get away with this. You're pushing too far ahead, and you're going to lose everyone." And he was the one who taught me this principle. He said, what you need to do is find out where the group is, figure out 2 clicks beyond where they are, present that to them. They'll fall back at least 1 click ahead of where they are now. And that's not fun. It's painful. It takes too much time, but it's better than pushing on people having to track 1 or 2 clicks back from where they are. So a group I'm working with now made a decision about 2 years ago that they wanted to be an anti-racist organization and they wanted to be an equitable organization. Their strategic plan even outlined that very specifically. Working with them on their new plan, and they have backed down from that to saying that they want to focus on belonging. And in the conversations, when I brought up, well, what about being equitable? People said, well, we can't use that phrase because if we say that we want to be an equitable organization, people would think we want to give people reparations, and that's too controversial. Which I responded, well, it's really sad to me because when I was first working in the equity space, which is in the healthcare space, it meant removing barriers that kept people from being able to achieve their best state of health. They were institutionally created to keep people in a specific place. That was equity. It's sad that's been co-opted as something that is controversial. There's nothing really to do with equity, but it's keeping us from taking care of people and giving people the opportunity to be who they are, not in a overlording, good to you, nice little black person, I can take care of you, as opposed to being equitable. And the second piece that came up in that was when this group was working on new people to become involved with them, and they had a goal, a very specific goal of being a more diverse organization. And they listed out what diversity was. And diversity for them had to do with ethnicity and belief and identification. And they ended up with 2 white males that they're bringing on. And when I pushed back a little bit about should we just take a step back and not bring anyone on, or bring 1 person on and just wait and do our work a little harder to bring on some people who actually are diverse, the answer was, well, we need 2 people in case 1 quits. And then the other answer was, well, they are diverse because they don't have the same level of education that we all have. That is not a measure of diversity. So then my responsibility as a leader of this organization, this group, is to determine what can I do incrementally that is radical, that moves in the direction they need to move in without them even realizing they're in the hot water. Or is that they're in the frog in the pot being boiled. I haven't figured it out yet. Maybe I'll get something today. But I really think it's incumbent upon us as leaders to never be satisfied with less than the whole, but recognize the whole comes in pieces.
I think you're putting a moral perspective for sure on the table that reflects kind of an intention of where we need to move.
Linda, I know you're gonna come to wrap it all up in 15 seconds. Got a lot from the colleagues' presentations. And something I hope you'll address is a big idea. Citizen of the word, equity, in the big sense. Companies, people, we hide in the bigness of it, while the everyday conditions on the ground go unaddressed. But we spout the right words and we get a pass. So I'm interested in perspective around the bigness of the thing. I'm a citizen, again, with respect. I'm a citizen of the world. And meanwhile, my neighborhood is on fire.
I'd love to.
I think there's too much pressure on me. After all of these brilliant comments, but I think if I could just try to thread through a few themes that we can then bounce off, that's the whole idea here.
Yes.
So number one, I think we all agree the world is changing, right? There's this macro level of tremendous upheaval and change, and not always to the positive. So all of this is going on. And then in that context, you know, there are a lot of moving parts, and there's a definite crisis of identity. I think what we are talking about as individuals, we're trying to find where we belong. That's why belonging is a lot more important to me than just diversity and inclusion, because diversity and inclusion is looking at it from the outside. Belonging is a feeling you have from the inside. So I think we are experiencing the, cataclysmic, almost biblical level of change with the climate change and everything else, politically, et cetera. And then at the same time, people inside at the micro level obviously are trying to find those anchors around, especially young people like your daughter, those anchors that used to be in place are also shifting. And yes, we created identity around our religions, our national origins, all the different markers of identity. They're all being blended together and displaced, right? So how do we build out the that platform, that anchor for ourselves as individuals to operate in the business, not in the business, in the world. But the point I wanted to make about business, because that's where I spend most of my time, is there is a, you're probably all familiar with Edelman, marketing firm, big marketing firm, and they do a trust barometer. It's a global survey that they run across the world, and they measure individual relationships, how people relate, or how much trust there is between individuals and institutions. And they look at media, they look at government, they look at businesses, et cetera, et cetera. And it's interesting to track those data from where they started 20 years ago to now, because it's good to, again, to kind of bounce off some specific data, even though we know that that could be also debated. But what's really interesting, and this is where I'm somewhat in disagreement with you here, that right now the highest trust is actually in companies. It used to be the lowest trust of the media. I think we all understand why. Then the government institution, but the companies, because, and it could be, and it's not just in the US where work life means so much to us, but it's around the world, that companies are changing in their relationship to individuals. And I think when we say that we don't trust companies to be that place, and I will come around to the role of leadership, right? Because I think that's where it's all. But that relationship with companies is significantly redefined, especially also after the pandemic. And it was Larry Fink, who is the CEO of BlackRock, the largest asset manager in the world. He writes a letter to CEOs. It's called A Letter to the CEOs. And if you want to know anything about business, just read that letter. It's usually once a year, really beautifully written. And what he says there is that the most disrupted relationship and redefined, I can't remember exactly the quote, relationship coming out of the pandemic is the one between the employer and employee. So that contract, even emotional contract that people have with their place of work has been completely redefined. And companies that are not keeping up with the expectations of their employees are going to fail as businesses. That's why I'm looking at what's going on at Twitter right now. And actually, last night I was at an event and I met a few Twitter employees and I was kind of informally interviewing them. You know, I'm less concerned about what's going to happen around how he's going to, who he's going to invite back and what's going to happen to Twitter. As a professional in the field of workplace, right? I am watching what he's doing with his employees and thinking, who on earth is going to want to work for this company? Especially people who have talents and skills that are so highly marketable today. When they can walk across the street and get to the best startups, the other types of companies where those skills are at a premium, right? I think that's the biggest and often understated damage that is just right now as we speak being done at such a huge scale, right? It's so the point I want to make, and I think again, and this is just the beginning of the conversation, that as far as that employment relationship with that is being redefined as we speak, it's probably the place for all of us to watch and how the companies are stepping up to take on responsibilities that other institutions in society are failing to deliver. And it doesn't mean that there will be a moment when other institutions are going to come in. But I think right now at this moment, it's that relationship that we are watching. And that's why we want to give people jobs. We want to give people skills so that they can build security, they can build identity around what they can do. And they give what the businesses, the rightly led businesses can do is give people a place to act and be valued and all of those intangibles that other institutions used to deliver. But now in this current phase, I think we need to be mindful of what companies can do and what we should expect of the businesses and what we should expect of business leaders.
Thank you. So,
Yes, beautifully well said. Concern is toward the end of your remarks. Does the rise in business trust actually reflect the diminished status of other institutions? Now, these other institutions exist to do the very thing we're now asking business to do that does not exist for these purposes. And I think longer term, those within the business priority set, that is a clash of titans. And the diminishing demise of the civic life and other things that were anchors in our communities. Boy, if those are now being taken over by businesses that these are ancillary concerns to their bottom line concern, that might be concerning.
I'd like to build on that with our next question, which is the space of intention. And Ken kind of framed for us kind of attributed to Martin Luther King about the arc of justice and the fact that it bends with justice, right, over time. And part of what I think about as change agents is how do we bend it in the direction that we wish things to go. So I'd really like to turn back to the level of intention and say, well, what is it that we might do as organizational leaders to kind of bend organizations in the direction that we believe it should go to in response to all these trends, all these needs that are out there related to belonging, related to issues of equity and voice, to moral perspectives. I'd love to turn it back to you all to perhaps address that question. And this is really putting your own perspective and your stance on these issues, which is what is the direction in which we need to bend some of these forces.
I understand and agree with what you're saying, Jonathan. What I'd say is that it's not my role as a business leader or my business's role to make our people good citizens. But they spend most of their productive effort in my business,
Yeah.
creating things.
Mhm.
And they're holding me accountable that they don't have to turn the part of themselves off that cares about the impact of what they're doing when they show up for work. So for me, it's not about turning business into some moral force for good, because we're capitalist organizations. And to your point, there's an original sin aspect to it, right? So what I'm trying to do is exactly what you're saying. From the reality of where we are in this moment, how can we be ethical and moral actors and still try to make a profit, run a business? And it's not that that's easy, or that in any given moment, we're not going to do things that are harmful. But the thing we can allow ourselves to do is say that whole part of our side of ourselves that cares about other people, cares about society and the planet, should just flick off, so we can clock in and make that profit margin. And the reason why that's good business is, for the point you said, people want to work in a community that cares that way. And ideally, our clients want to work with a company that's treating their people equitably, that's paying them well, and that cares deeply about their outcomes, not just. There's no limit to being transactional. If you treat employees transactionally, they'll treat clients transactionally, they'll build software transactionally, and that never leads to great products. It never leads to good outcomes.
Yes.
Perspective.
Oh, yeah, totally agree with what you said. Like, you just summarized it beautifully. I mean, obviously, like with me, if I'm being asked, like, why I want to work as Sandra Jarrett, I mean, like, it's very diverse. Like, I can see, like, on the floor, like, it's like from people from different countries, like literally from many countries. And then, we have like, Diwali event, I know Diwali, I know, but I don't know what's the taste of it until my company organized a Diwali event. And then they invited like a dancer, Indian dancer, and then food from the country. And then we just learn about, like, oh, this is their culture. This is what it is like. And then we mingled with them, and then I mean, my Indian colleagues, like, so shared about the culture, about who they are, about what they embrace. And then, it increases, I believe, the sense of belonging, like, so I think the company has, at the company level, obviously, they have the responsibility. Obviously, profitability is on top of the leader's mind. But surveys says that, that D&I increasing sense of belonging actually internally increasing the level of engagement, the level of innovation, the level of collaboration between departments. Externally, it makes your company becoming like an attractive place. So thinking about internally retaining talents, and then externally to recruit talents.
So really hearing that these are not opposing forces for employees and companies, that they could work virtuously together. Peter, what would you have?
It's fascinating, and I maybe a little different perspective, and potentially because most of my career has been in nonprofit and small organizations. I don't do the work that the skill that you all do, or the relationships, but I not heard that statistic before of the trust factor. I think, Jonathan, you're on point with it, as others, one raises up. But I also wonder, to some extent, it's because people are looking for leadership. I think people tend to default to more democratic leadership because it's easier to be told what to do and have rules than it is to have to think for yourself and be responsible. So I think then the responsibility on leadership is how you present yourself. I mean, some of what you've just said, Ken, but how are you then a responsive leader? How are you an empathetic leader that is not looking to aggrandize yourself or to have control, but rather to give authority and power back to others? How are you guiding others towards their whole self, which still can lead towards profitability, as opposed to cannibalizing people to get just to the profit? And so I think it actually puts more pressure on leadership to not be that autocratic leader, but to be that inclusive leader. I think the belonging, I didn't mean to poo-poo it before. I mean, I think it's important, but I want to make sure it has some substance. It can be a very soft word as opposed to, it needs to have teeth to it. And what does belonging mean? That's hard work. That's hard work to get people who come from diverse backgrounds and different thoughts and different attitudes and different ethos to all be a part of a whole. And feel like they belong there, that their value is as much as the next person to them. That's really incumbent upon leadership. Make everyone feel valued and make everyone feel a part of the contribution to what your goal is as an organization.
Beliefs versus conduct. Within the workplace, conduct, behavior seems to be the only measure. But that might be changing. So I may not believe like others in the company believe, but I'm a great performer and I'm a good person. My conduct is A+. Do opportunities inure to me? Or because this place for performance is now being impacted or I'm being judged based on what I believe. I may be a church going, whatever, that kind of person. So with some of the energy and the new good stuff that's happening because I don't participate, am I penalized? Not because of performance, but because of my belief. That's why I struggle with the workplace taking on all of these dimensions. Society, absolutely. Institutions that were created to do this kind of arbitering, if you will, absolutely. The workplace, I don't know. I'm open.
And that's why
It's down. I'll do it right now.
yeah, the workplace is changing. I think you're pointing to, some kind of workplace that kind of a post-industrial revolution. And the whole point about what we're going through is to keep an open mind, and there's no one workplace template that everyone is working against. Because what we are looking at is in every company is a microcosm of a culture, of a community, of a village. And now we're even talking about neighborhoods in organizational science. We are developing tools to understand what represents belonging here, to your point. For example, what we measure is the number of friends you have at work. We've found that people who you can, go out with after work, you can go to a Halloween parade with your kids together. So you run races to raise money for good causes, et cetera, et cetera. That's kind of that community building is more important. And we know that the fewer friends you have, and by friends, sharing some of those values that Jonathan, you're talking about outside of the specifically performance-oriented part of your responsibility. So, companies, and you might not like it because you would rather invest in the communities around, but with the transient life that we have, you just moved to New York City, welcome to the neighborhood, right? And how do we make that inclusive? How do we create that mobility and give people choice? And I think what's with the low unemployment rate right now, we really give people a chance to choose what kind of community they want to join, where their beliefs, their sense of identity is going to be validated, and where they contribute the most. And, what's in the workplace, what we measure now is the sense of purpose, for example. There's a whole new way of recruiting people based on their purpose orientation, so we don't necessarily just hire for skills. You have to, because what we find, and I make that point all the time, you hire for passion and you train for skills. If you're just bringing in skills with disregard to what other, identity markers they represent, then it could be not a good fit for your organization and the culture you want to create. And I researched companies, and one of them that you all probably heard many times over is Patagonia. Patagonia is deliberately, they pay among the employee benefits. They pay people's bail if they were arrested for climate protest. That's part of their benefit. The company takes a responsibility to bail out their people because they're so passionate to be protesting climate change, right? So, and that's a company decision. They put a big ad in New York Times that was kind of iconic with a Patagonia jacket and a big sign across it saying, "Don't buy that jacket." That was their big ad in the New York Times saying, if you have enough jackets, you don't need another one on Black Friday, only go. And that is a deliberate decision about how do we configure that culture inside. And that's how they recruit people. Obviously they have more application for those jobs than any other company you can think about. And that's a deliberate act of leadership. And it's a deliberate act of selection, and people join that community and becomes a village. It becomes not a religion, but at least a point of passion.
So from a place of intention, I'm hearing much more the need for integration, convergence, that these are not necessarily opposing forces, that well-being can actually enhance performance and belonging that people want inside of organizations. So I'm wondering if you could highlight for us where are the bright spots where you see these things emerging inside of organizations in terms of actual practices that we can draw inspiration from. You mentioned Patagonia as an example of an organization.
Just for everyone, not to get too technical, but some companies eliminated performance management. There's no one going around rating you on, how you perform, right? Some companies have unlimited vacation. And what do they find? Well, Netflix was one of those. What did they find? People are taking less vacation. You give them more time and say, you're on your own. We trust you. And that's where the point of trust comes in. I mean, we are operating under, with a certain set of conceptions about how people are going to behave. It's like theory X and theory Y. Everyone learned it in, introduction to psychology. How do you view people? And some leaders with that much, much more trust in their people actually getting better outcomes than those who put a lot more constraints around it and thinking that it's, it's the supervision that matters. You have to look over their shoulder and make sure that they're at their desk chained to their so so these are just examples of how structurally cultures of companies are changing from the inside to create that sense of social commitment to the cause and personal passion, personal purposefulness, rather than putting all of these structures of control that used to be in place. And you think, oh, it's a function of a smaller company. Microsoft doesn't have performance management system. They just eliminated it because Satya Nadella, 180-degree change from Bill Gates in how the leader thought of their culture. And look how well Microsoft is doing compared to where they were 20 years ago.
Thank you for that comment.
A lighthearted moment at my company, Bitwise Industries. The underlying among the grapevine is don't be the reason why we need to have a vacation policy. So don't you abuse it so much.
I
So
love
that's
that.
kind of the culture.
Right.
Johnson, what have you seen in your organization that you might share as been a positive practice?
It is a kind of leadership. And part of my comments and remarks are frankly informed by observing and explosive growth tech company. And how the CEOs, co-CEOs, co-founders, set a culture, one we euphemistically call the keeper of culture. Everyone who comes in, we're probably up to 600 employees now, and that's doubled in the past year. Everyone who comes in has to see her. And the kinds of, it's more than what's on black and white. It's more than the policies. It's frankly not the policies and the structure. It is the overall sense. People within the company are treated respectfully. They respond respectfully. It's an inclusive culture. There are not hard rules and so forth. Similarly, we're very active in the reentry space, and some of the things you talk about with Patagonia, the company does as well. Still, I'm interested in perspective around opportunity. My background is around providing opportunity. It's a big country with a lot of folks who are not accessing the best opportunities. Will those opportunities be available to those who believe a certain way? From my own experience with my company, Bitwise, I can say that's not the case, comma, but that's not a self-serving statement. It's still, I believe, is worth a broader consideration. Will the best opportunities align to the corporate sector, who there is no greater aggregator of money and influence than the corporate form? There's nothing like it the world has ever seen. And if that becomes the dominant expression of what's good and not good, that's a tough thing to deal with.
Peter, you've been involved in driving equity inclusion in organizations. What have you seen that really makes a difference?
First, as the leader, you have to really do a good gut check of yourself. And I think that was probably the hardest thing for me. I think I told some of you a quick story, but I was tasked with taking on a failing wine scene in the state of Georgia. It was historic black wine. It was in very, very, very bad shape. And was brought in by the city to see if it was salvageable, and started working with people and turning it around. And, went from failing and falling apart to having a pretty vibrant place in the community. And my office was situated, I had a glass door in the front of it, and I had windows looking out to the parking lot. So people, I was accessible, people would see me, and I was very proud of what I was doing. And this one day, a bunch of kids came from the school across the street to an after school program. And there was one white kid in with them all. So I watched him coming up the driveway and into the parking lot, and saw him come in the front door, and we're signing in. I went out and said, "Are you supposed to be here?" And he goes, "I don't know, with my friends." And, "Well, you need to come with me." So I took him by the hand, walked him back across the street, part of the proctor over the cross street. And I said, "He came over to the watch." She goes, "Well, that's where his mother signed him out to." Oh, I'll bring it back. Brought him back. By the time that kids were all in the program doing stuff, brought him back to the program. And I said, here's whatever his name was. And she said, "Can I talk to you?" I said, "Sure." She goes, "Now?" And I said, "Sure." She goes, "In your office?" And I went, "Okay." So Deborah Enoch, she was my program director, just a wonderful, amazing woman, been there for 19 years. And she said to me, "That's the most racist thing I've ever seen anyone do." I said, "What did I do?" She goes, what do you mean, what did you do? You're a white guy, sitting in your office, see one white kid come in the door, you think you gotta protect him and take care of him, doesn't belong, you take him across the street. Don't you know the name and face for a black kid coming in this door? I can take anyone I want and take him anywhere. You just don't get to do that." She walked out of my office. And it was the moment I realized, no matter how wonderful I thought it was, all the great things that I was doing, I was a racist. That's who I was. That's how I've been brought up. That was what was inculcated into me because of how I grew up. And I think until I recognized that, I've been doing a lot of work in that space. Had some wonderful teachers and mentors, and even received rewards from the local NAACP. But until that moment, when I was confronted with the inherent and unconscious bias that I had, I didn't realize the damage I was inflicting on what I was doing. So I think as a leader, the first thing you have to do is a real hard check of who you are and where you're coming from before you can affect any change in that space.
Really hearing the onus that you put in your comments on leaders to kind of model and to learn and to recognize that there are challenges. There's growth opportunities here. And Martha, I know you spoke about Diwali as an example of a certain kind of practice. So I'd like to actually come to you first for the last question, maybe a speed round, because we'd like to reserve some time for people here to also engage in the conversations. So what's a takeaway or a challenge you'd like to offer all of us today as to what we might actually need to do, or what you might hope that we would do as we lean into the future, given the context that we're in? So
First of all,
perhaps we'll do this fairly quickly. So we
Yeah.
can-
Yeah, it should start with obviously, like shift in the mindset and then understanding your calling. Everyone, all of us here are leaders, right? It's not just the CEO or C-suite of companies. All of us here are leaders, and we have calling. My calling is I'm very passionate about addressing the inequalities, not just in US, but in Indonesia, for example, Indonesia working with street children organization. For example, why you take internship just for those from like reputable universities like top tier, right? Why not taking somebody like all these street children organization, right? This organization, they take them from the street, put them in the school, educate them, mentoring them, and then they go to second year or first year university, right? And then why don't we take them as an intern in our organization? And that way, they probably will be the first person from their community to go to international organization or a startup or any reputable companies, right? Or any whatever companies. So I think, and then it will have a radical change into the person himself, and it will have an influence to the community, to other street children. So that's something like, like all of us here understanding your calling. I cannot tackle like, street children in 15 countries. I only have 24 hours, right? But all of us here, we are leaders with specific calling, given our background. So understand the calling and then do whatever you can in your hands to fulfill the calling and then address whatever you are passionate about inequality.
Yeah. So really hearing again this opportunity for organizations to be
Yes.
also good.
I'm sorry. Also, like the company I work also care about, like believe in entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
It will actually, they believe that entrepreneurship is a way to help like people from low income families actually to go to higher class through. So that's why I'm involved at the Sun Innovation Center, the startup incubator. And we just, like teach these college students, high school students about business models, about run a business. It's just really cool. But, like this is like, they could be the next Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg, right?
No.
From creating an innovative idea from that perspective. So, yeah. So,
Yeah. So what would you like to use as takeaway?
I think it will take all of us where I think Jonathan and I are pretty much on the same page. I'm just saying, don't underestimate the impact at this point that the companies can make. And I think to your point, Martha, it's both at the level of organizations, right? Organizations are led by people. And I think we need to all, step back and think about what our impact needs to be. And how we can help, from both as individuals, but also from the platforms that we command, whether it's in the YMCA or education in my case, or software, the banking system. Everyone has to be in it for the right reason.
And how is the right reason determined? And that's the fear. These pendulums swing. And today, there are things that many of us agree with that have become part of the Force for Good Incorporation. The pendulum has also swung in other ways. And many of us who have been not afford historically the best opportunities in our economy. My belief is we should be careful how much we grant the most efficient aggregator of resources and influence the world has ever seen in terms of being the force for good.
And what's your stance on this?
I'm gonna kind of also answer the previous question because with the challenge of like, what's the concrete action you're taking? So instead of the call, I'll tell you what we're doing. This year, we spend about 5% of our gross margin and our net income investing back in the business to create transparent and equitable market-based wages, to build a capability matrix and compensate people and advance people based on capability growth, not on performance. Thanks to our Chief People Officer, Rebecca Greatling here. And all of that has resulted in more engagement, more morale from employees. That's driven down our profitability, which is the biggest sacrifice a business can make, right? So the opportunity is in reaching outside of ourselves into communities. We have a peer network of, part of it's just enough, right? Smaller professional services company who are values aligned with us and are making those similar investments. And we're trying to not compete with each other, but create a space for companies that work on those value systems and those economics. And then there's a tech equity collaborative on the West Coast that advocates for pay equity and fair access to rent, rent equity. And they're creating a responsible contracting standard to try to get big FANG companies to, contract out the work responsibly, because that's where a lot of the inequity happens in those large companies. The employees are privileged and they have everything they want, and they're being served by people, literally served by people who are contractors who are paid minimum wage to be fired. And so we're talking to them as a community. It's like, well, if you're trying to create this space, can you create a marketplace where companies that are working on diversity, access to technology, fair employment standards, great benefits, we cost for it. So can you create a space where we can find the people who care enough about that they'll pay for that? So it's working within the system and being very practical, but at the same time, really doing stuff, not just talking about it.
Well said. And quickly, Bitwise Industries. Our model, we are a for-profit company, venture back, raised over 100+ million from private sector, private equity. The value that we deliver is the world's most diverse workforce. We hold both of these 100. We don't resolve the tension between the two. We hold it, and there is a tension. We don't want to resolve it. And to resolve it is to compromise, at some level. Instead, we hold both, and we train, provide living wages to all tech apprentices, accessible pre-apprenticeship programs, and both employment opportunities within the company, as well as meeting local company IT needs as well. And as great as a lot of the work that's being done with underestimated humans, overwhelmingly, those opportunities are still relegated to some of the least productive areas of our economy. The tech sector provides many of the best opportunities. So that's where we choose to play. So I applaud you, absolutely.
And Peter will give you the final word. But
Sorry.
what's, takeaway you'd offer as an insight or
I
recommendation?
had to.
I think people do want to belong. I think the generations that we have raised want some place that validates who they are, and they feel like that where they spend most of their waking hours has more meaning than paycheck. So I think it's very important that we provide that space where there is that tension between performance and self-actualization. And where I love what you said about, hiring for passion, not for talent. We can teach pieces. At the same time, I know that people want to be acknowledged and rewarded a lot for what they can do. So I think it is a process of continued assessment, affirmation, involving a lot of people in the decision-making process. Just you're not doing it alone. Diversification, not just of what you can see outwardly, but what is inwardly. And I think diversification of thought and attitude, I think is a very important part.
It's a really good place for us to leave on, and both kind of acknowledging the challenges of this level of change that's going on, but the roles that we can play as leaders in organizations to, if you will, bend the arc direction we feel. So I'd love to give our panelists a round of applause. In terms of faith, how much time? 50. Okay, so we've got 15 minutes for some breakout conversations. So you've been listening in and perhaps taking in information, but I know that you all have a lot of experience, a lot of perspective that you might be able to add to the conversation. And something that we'd like to do as part of the work of the Leadership Forum is to be able to harvest our collective wisdom, all that we know, and be able to transmit that out into the world. So we'd love for you to have your conversations around 3 questions here. So what did you hear from the panelists, conversation that we've had here that really caught your attention? Perhaps there was an insight or question or practice that caught your attention. 2, how does the discussion that you kind of heard here connect with your own experience? Perhaps you've seen things in organizations that you'd like to highlight as positive practices, or perhaps challenges that might exist, questions that you might have. I'd like to introduce that. And finally, what's a key takeaway for you from today? Perhaps your own insight or recommendation. And for the last one, we'd like you to be able to capture that on the index card that we'd like to collect from you, that we can then harvest for a report that we'd like to put out. Right? So again, leaning on collective wisdom. So those 3 questions. I'll really kind of repeat that. What did you hear that caught your attention from the discussion? What would you add to the conversation from your own experience or your own practice? And 3, what's a takeaway that you'd like to offer out into the world, if you will, that we can. We'd love our panelists to also kind of join the group here. I know that the room is not necessarily set up as well for conversations, but perhaps if we can find pods of 3 that we can make on the same level, if you want to pivot around and kind of get into a group of 3 or 4, where you can have this conversation. Only about 15 minutes, so be sure to share the time equally and make sure everybody has a voice. And we'll give you maybe a 5-minute warning as we're winding down. Thanks again to the panelists. Yeah, please. So, on Zoom, you'll have breakouts as well.